Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sharp Vision with 25, the podcast that discusses the benefits of prioritizing project pricing in your business strategy and why it matters. Today, I'm joined with David Baum, the CEO and founder of Red Ocean LLC, to discuss the strategies and insider knowledge on how to set up your business for success in winning government RFPs. Thank you, David, for joining today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for having me.
So, to jump right into the episode, could you please tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today professionally?
Oh, yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. So, I guess to kind of start a little bit from the beginning, I was a private sector guy in marketing and recruiting. Wanted to pursue a graduate degree, and the Department of Defense had a great program to do so. So, I got into the 1102 series, which many know is the Contract Specialist Acquisition series. And I did that for about 2 decades, starting at the Defense Information Systems Agency. I moved on from there as the acting branch chief of PL 64, which runs a lot of their special projects. Went to the National Reconnaissance Office. I was there about a decade and a half, rotated around all the towers, is kind of what they refer to it as in senior contracting officer roles. Anything from flying SPOs to IT. Also ran their acquisition center of excellence for a little while as a deputy director. I also ran the innovation team for the DNI IC level. And my last position at the NRO was the director office of contracts policy. After that role, I went back to the private sector as the head of business operations for Amazon Kuiper Government Solutions. And there I served all things business operations, really. So all things acquisitions, compliance, proposal operations. And as that company was starting up, of course, helped with, business development, capture, any finance type activities, prior to those new verticals getting stood up. After just about 2.5 years doing that, I launched and founded Red Ocean LLC, where I'm currently the CEO of, that focuses on two verticals. The first vertical is actually providing acquisition subject matter expertise directly to the government as an actual government contractor. And the vertical in which I think the audience is most interested now is my commercial consulting role, where we focus on revenue growth, acquisition execution, and of course, business operations.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It sounds like you had lots of different experiences within the industry, trying out different roles, and it's amazing to see that you've accumulated all of that knowledge into building something your own, being able to kind of bring together everything you've learned and be able to help people in the best way you can. And we're so grateful to have you on the podcast to share that information with all of us and our audience. So thanks again. So just to give some background on the government RFP process, which is a big topic for today's episode, can you walk us through what makes a strong BOE or basis of estimate and what is their purpose?
So I appreciate that opportunity. I'm going to start a little bit higher answering that question. We'll kind of work down to the specifics of the BOE. The proposal itself, I tell people regularly that really the focus is the technical approach, which is the same evaluation team that's going to review the basis of estimate. So a lot of companies put, and as well they should, a lot of effort into the technical delivery of what they're bidding. That BOE can't be an afterthought or an administrative. You looked at it as administrative burden. It's interesting because when I first go into a company, one of the very first things I ask is, who's developing their basis of estimate? What methodology do you have at your disposal to use? And really at the end of the day, most BOE templates, relatively similar across agencies, they'll talk about, what WIBIS level it is, whether it's second or third tier, depending on what the instructions say, what statement of work section it references. And then I guess I do want to harp on for the audience because I want the audience to take away some value add here. I did serve as a cost analyst for many, many major source selections, and also successfully defended 5 GAO level protests. When you select a methodology, whether or not it's a little bubble you check or you type it in or whatever the format is, I do recommend to my clients select one. That may sound simple, but I see it across industry. I saw it when I was an evaluator. If you select, let's say, analogous, right? And for those that don't know what analogous method is, that means you're using a similar program to compare your estimate to. So it's a comparison. A lot of times they'll select that. Then my clients will also select engineering judgment, which I think many of you listening probably recognize that's kind of the last one that you want to pick. That's kind of like the if you have nothing else, that's the one that you pick. And when I have conversations with them, I said, well, why did you write both, or check the box for both? And they said, well, in order to do an analogous program, we had to add well, they should, right? I mean, you should factor in the technical complexity, and you should add a weighting factor and everything if the programs aren't perfectly aligned, which I mean, let's be honest, are not typically perfectly aligned. So hopefully they've gone through that level of thought. But then they said, well, in order to come up with this weighting factor, there was engineering judgment involved. I'm like, no, 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 no. That is the analogous method, right? Like, you don't have to also check engineering judgment if you're using engineering judgment in order to do an analogous method. And the next one I'll hit on is parametric. So parametric, you really need to have the right tool and modeling associated with that. Typically, it's more product driven and less service based when you're using parametric, which is great. And the advice that I would offer up for parametric is make sure that you have a tool or the background. If you're a small business, right? I mean, even if you're doing stuff on a spreadsheet, show the math, show the cost analysts, which also read it, by the way, but the tech evaluators, show them the math, right? At the end of the day, you want to say, hey, this is fair and reasonable, right? That's kind of what the tech guys are told. And then it goes over to the cost analysts, and then they're looking at reasonableness and realism, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit of different time. But when you're doing a BOE, think fair and reasonable. If you were shown this cold, right? Because people, go through these proposal rooms and you live it for 30 to 90 days, especially if there's a draft. So it may make sense to you, but I mean, I know you did the math. Every client I've ever had, they have the math, right? Put it in there. I mean, you have it. Show them. To kind of circle back a little bit, Jenny, the importance of basis of estimates is most major system acquisitions, and I'm using my intelligence community vernacular a little bit, which is kind of equivalent to like a Cat 1 program in DoD. I would say that the technical approach on major programs wins the day. BOEs, if they're not done correctly, will lose the program for you. Right. So I hate to sound a little bit negative, but if you put all your energy into a technical approach and then you write a BOE, and let's face it, industry, because I reviewed a lot of these, developing on this side of the table and evaluating on the other side of the table. If you find yourself cutting and pasting language into the justification of your BOEs, you're not putting enough effort into it. I mean, believe me, these are actually read by two different evaluation groups. And if it literally has cut and paste in the same language in every single BOE they're reading, what's human nature, right? You're immediately going to look at that and go, they didn't put a lot of effort into this, right? Like they just literally cut and paste the same justification over and over again. So the last thing I'll kind of address, Jenny, to look at the BOEs a little bit more. They typically have a section where you can address your ground rules and assumptions. Please heavily use that. That is an opportunity that further explains how you came up with something. I'll give a simple example. But if you're bidding a program that is, we'll say, 10 security officers, right? So it's just a service based. It's 10 full-time equivalent positions. And, there's certain objectives and shall statements to whether it's a statement of objectives or a statement of work, just to kind of keep it simple. But if historically this is done by 10 humans, right? And you're going to bid 8, and you're going to throw in all the buzzwords, we have digital engineering and AI and all these cool tools and whatever. And you're going to bid 8, right? Because you think that could give you an edge. When you're explaining how you came up with that, in the ground rules and assumptions, recognize that you're reducing from their baseline and how you've accounted for that. Because I can tell you, as being a Govy for a long time, the first thing they look at is, and unfortunately this is true for decades, right? It just is the example, right? There's a 2-person reduction, and it sounds good, But as tools get better and automation gets better, guess what? Their mission gets more complex. So from me as just a former evaluator, I've done each granular level. I've, written all the decision documents. So don't sell yourself short on, I like what I like to say, burn the calories on the BOEs. It's worth it. Sorry, Jenny, I'll go a little faster on the next one.
All good, all good. No, I think it's great to get in depth and sort of explain the process. I know it's
Mhm.
helpful for me to hear and helpful for any of our audience listening who maybe is not as familiar with the depth of this process. But it sounds like on a very, very simple surface level, kind of just showcase your work and
Yeah.
show your process. And, the more you share, the better it is, if I'm understanding.
And that's a good point. I mean, kind of as a follow-up, I mean, because I recognize how the process works. But believe me, I feel for the cost guys, right? Because I'm on the other side of the table. The technical team, the management team, the past performance team, they're kind of constantly making revisions in your proposal operation process, whatever that may be, probably some form of Shipley. The BOEs and the cost team and the cost volume, they're always the last to get done because they're waiting for all those final tweaks because everything's got to dovetail together, right? So I recognize what I'm saying is not easy to do, but I'll also throw that out there because I've lived on the cost side. Technical folks, be nice to your cost team because they're up all night trying to adjust the last minute changes that you made. And again, I'm just kind of foot stomping that the BOE, and obviously what dovetails to that is the cost volume, which typically has some super complicated spreadsheet and a narrative, explaining your indirection, direction, all that good stuff. My point is the BOE shouldn't be. Most of the time when I talk to folks, it's kind of like, oh, they want a BOE volume. It's like, no, you really should put the adequate resources. And I get it with OpEx and B&P. You only have so much to go around. I would encourage you. BOE is money well spent.
So, moving on to my next question for you, David. When you're aiming to win a government RFP and putting that together to bid, what makes a solution unmissable to the evaluators that you've seen in your experience?
I really like the word that you used in that question, right? Which is unmissable. So anyone that has kind of done this long enough, it's more of an art than it is a science, right? Because when things are being evaluated, unconscious bias will come in no matter how hard evaluators try. And I've been on the other side. They really do try hard, but it's human nature does come into play, right? So when I ran a proposal operations team, we always used to tell them that you win a program in the capture process, you lose it in proposals. So, really, what I mean by that is the capture team should be helping the proposal team answer really one question. And that question is, what problem are you solving? If you don't know the answer to that question, then you need to circle back with your whether BD and capture are the same group or they're a separate team. You need to circle back and say, what is the customer trying to solve here? At the end of the day, why are they contracting and what problem do they have? And that's true whether let's just say it's buying a piece of hardware. Well, what problem is that hardware solving? Again, kind of sounds simple, but a lot of times that is missed, right? It's like, well, let's take a step back, because they want to jump into, doing win themes and all this stuff. It's like, well, what's the problem? The second part that I've found, at least to do our best, right, not to have something missed by evaluator, is architecting the solution should be the next step. And that should involve the whole team, the BD team, the capture team, the proposal team, likely whether you call them a technical PM or the program manager that would pick it up, that hopefully is involved in the bid. um, they all should have that conversation to say, let's solution what our plan is. And the reason why I like this question and I want to harp on it is we tend to fall in the compliance trap. And I'm sure our audience knows, right, that when you start a blue team, sorry, I'm using a little bit of Shipley terms, which is outside of black hats and stuff like that. Most companies, that's kind of the start of their solutioning activity where they do an outline or a storyboard or something to that effect. It's very section L heavy, which are evaluation instructions. They're very concerned about making sure that that they follow the instructions and have all the right sections. And that tends to drive the outline. Well, I guess I'll throw this out. Don't base your outline on section L. It should be based on section M. Right? So that's how an evaluation decision tree on the other side of the fence is set up on section M. So it should go section M, section L, SAL, procedurals. That's how you should prioritize your outline. Anyways, I'll pull myself back up to really, circle back on solutioning. I don't want to fall in the trap that early of trying to address a RFP to be compliant. Because I will tell you, and there's a lot of companies that are really, really good at this, but there's no prize for second place, right? So if you do a super good job of being compliant and answering the mail, but you haven't thought through the problem and truly the solution in simple terms, right? And I'm not trying to say they're not smart people reading this stuff, but they read a lot of them. Be very targeted at what you're trying to come across as what your solution is and why they care, right? How does it work in their environment? Why do they care? So I would say that's how you get a solution not missed, right? Is you really say, this is their problem, this is how we're going to solve it. We're not going to get caught up too early in how it's outlined and formatted. There's a lot of good people, including my consulting firm, that can help you put that stuff together, right? You want to make sure that you really think through good graphics, targeted objectives, and I don't really want to get tied up in the win theme, even though I do like win themes. But what I mean by objectives is, let's just say there's a 25-page technical approach. If you're reading through, let's say maybe at the red team level, you should be able to highlight something specific that says what, why, and impact for an evaluator that easily translates where it applies to a standard, right? Don't leave evaluators hunting on where to put something they like. Make sure it's easily transferable. And every page, you should have what they call, a triple plus or significant strength. If you don't, not to be mean, but it's just fluff. You should have a third-party reader, like, pick another program manager in a different vertical, right? And have them read a page and say, if you're evaluating this one page, what would you highlight as a significant strength? If that PM can't highlight a sentence or two, you got to go back to the drawing board, because at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? I mean, you have an evaluation team sitting in a consensus room. They have some evaluation tool that they use, and it brings up all the comments that they had. And that's the conversation they have, are those strengths that they pulled out. Hopefully not a lot of weaknesses, right? But obviously they can do that as well. But that's kind of what I like to foot stomp. Jenny, I know I deviated a little bit, but hopefully that addressed your question.
Oh, yeah, totally. I love how you honed the point of that. It's sometimes more of an art than a science, and that there's a whole strategy behind it. While there is formulaic and more scientific element to, like you said, the compliancy, but it totally makes sense how people could get trapped by that and trapped by all those rules and regulations. But really, it's the art of finding your value and capturing your value for the evaluator to understand it clearly. And your point about having a third party external person take a look at it, I feel like that's something that across many industries is really important, because you can get so stuck in your own work and your own team. It all makes sense to you in your mind, but then once you send it off, it could be interpreted very, very differently. So that's really good advice. Thank you. And so moving on, you've touched on the difference between the parametric approach and the analogous approach in the previous question. But I'd love to talk more about that, and how do data-driven parametric approaches to building these proposals traditionally outperform the analogous methods? And how would a tool like 25, the intelligent pricing and estimating software that we have, play into that shift as well?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked this question, because I did touch on it a little bit when I was going through the methods. So parametric pricing, that's the gold standard. If a company has parametric pricing, which, by the way, these major programs, they also have an independent cost estimate that I say they're, meaning they're in-house. They may be non-conflicted contractors, but their in-house estimating team, they also have parametric pricing. Typically what we're talking about here though, Jenny, I guess just to be clear, is these are typically major system acquisition programs or Cat 1 programs that obviously there's services involved, but they do have a pretty significant product or hardware component. That's very applicable to parametric pricing. So what I would say is the software that 25 has, which I've got exposed to that team years ago, and certainly proud to be partnering with them. It is a very customizable tool that allows you to at a granular level kind of keep track of how you really do build up your prices and why. And it kind of circles back, right, to having a tool to help you model what your prices are. You want the tool to be able to show you information that you can put in or maybe even automatically load into a BOE template. Because again, it's even if you don't have a tool and you have this whiz bang data scientist guy using Excel and they do a great job doing it, if you don't translate that with parametric pricing and show it, then I mean, I can just tell you, I was a cost analyst and I understand parametric pricing, but show how you modeled it. I feel like sometimes companies, don't want to show that it's a science and not an art. Cost analysts love that, right? They have a cost team that developed the same information that they're kind of using as their baseline. If you show them how you built that model and how and really, Jenny, for lack of a better term, show them the algorithm, right? If you show them the algorithm and what each variable in that algorithm means, they truly can actually understand how you came up with it. And the tech team can then see it. But then when it goes over to the cost team, what you want to have is then that cost team is going to actually look at the numbers and not just the method. Even if the numbers don't align perfectly, that's actually okay. They're not going to make adjustments if the algorithm is fair and reasonable, the way it was done makes sense. They're not going to adjust it just because it doesn't, because I mean every technical approach in delivery is slightly different, assuming you're not way out in left field, right? But so I think that's the real value of a BOE tool. Obviously it keeps you organized, right? And then you can make sure that you're not losing profit, which is important, right? Especially in this day and age, right? I mean, pricing things out, especially some of these programs, I mean, they're like 10-year programs. You've got to put like an escalation factor in there. You've got to put, an economic price adjustment in there. I'm going to try not to go, too deep, especially if it's using precious materials and stuff. It's a really complicated model to put together. So when you do that, have a tool that one, does that well for you. And I would like to argue they don't have to be an expert in pricing to get it, which is also a win. But then it allows you to transport that into an actual document that is simple. I love simple, right? Even a complicated algorithm, if you break down each variable and you explain how you came up with it, you want a reasonable person to just be look at that and go, well, that was well thought through. Like I get it. I get it.
Right. And are they
Yeah.
usually probably more inclined to work with you and move
Mhm.
forward in the process if they can understand how you got to your numbers and how you got to your values at the end?
Yeah, and it is interesting because a lot of times companies they're concerned, I guess, with showing that level of transparency, which I get, right? And there are a lot of reasons behind that. It is a bit of a double edged sword, but my advice would be have a really good modeling tool and own it. Be willing to share the data. I think it's going to work out for you more than it won't. And quite honestly, if it doesn't, I would argue potentially, maybe the cost team just didn't understand it, and that needs to be, kind of hopefully it goes into discussions, right? And then you could kind of explain it to them, opposed to, having to submit that letter to protest. But nonetheless, I would encourage this audience: believe in your model, be willing to be transparent, and quite frankly, have faith that the evaluators are going to understand it.
Right. That's great advice.
Yeah.
And so moving back to kind of the point of view of the evaluators looking through these proposals,
Mhm.
you've mentioned to me that they come up with a probable cost. And I'd love you to talk more through about like what are those key factors that lead to the
Mm.
probable cost that the evaluators come up with, and what might lead to potential probable cost adjustments, and how might
Mm.
teams be able to proactively avoid these adjustments?
Oh, excellent. So this unfortunately can be the death of a good proposal, right? So
Mm,
when we say probable cost, so I'll kind of start with who's responsible for the probable cost. So it is the cost chair. In a lot of agencies, that is the contracting officer, and then they have cost analysts help them. So what do they do first? What they do first is they take your cost volume submission, typically in a format that they've asked for. So that way, everything doesn't come in looking totally different. Typically it's a, really complicated spreadsheet. So the first thing that they do in developing a probable cost is they go through the submitted spreadsheet. They check that all the formulas are good, that everything links properly. And really what they're looking for is they're not looking to necessarily at first to make any adjustments or dispute anything. What they're doing is, do I need to change anything is what's submitted before I take ownership of it as my baseline? I will say, I mean, at least bigger programs, most companies are pretty good at this. In instructions, they typically say, make sure that you keep the spreadsheet active and show your formulas. That's why, by the way, they don't want to rebuild that spreadsheet. I mean, I have, but that's typically because there was an issue with the spreadsheet or all the formulas were broken and it was a mess. But what cost analysts want to do is they want the spreadsheet submitted. They can go through it, make sure it looks good, and then they can quote take ownership of it. Otherwise, they're going to have to rebuild it themselves, which is obviously the second option if necessary. So in this scenario, let's just say the very complex spreadsheet, cost analyst goes through it. It's pretty tedious for a day or two to really go through because once they own it, they own it. So then let's say they accepted that spreadsheet, everything looked good. They're going to save it as their probable cost. So then what they do is then they start looking through all the rates, right? I think everybody probably listening to this knows, direct and indirect rates. Lots of different ways to look at that. You can, ask, DCAA for rates. Typically, you ask for indirect letters, whether there's a forward rate agreement with DCMA. Typically, there's not. It's typically something that's just been proposed. But nonetheless, they go through and make all the rate adjustments that they see. If they see minor stuff, that's fine. If something jumps out at them, let's say direct labor rates. If something jumps out at them as not looking quite right, you just open Pandora's box. As soon as a cost analyst sees anything that doesn't seem quite right, they dive 1,000 feet deep in doing that stuff. So typically, as a cost chair, right, they would come to me and they say, I don't like it. And I'd say, I don't either. Get a payroll record run. Then what you can do is you can actually have a payroll run against those folks. If that doesn't line up, again, one, you want the probable cost spreadsheet to be accepted, right? If that's a mess and they have to rebuild it, they're already going to have at you, right? Well, let's just say that's good. You want simple stuff. Make sure it's clean because simple stuff you don't want a red flag coming up on. So typically, once they go through, they have a clean spreadsheet. They've done all the rate adjustments, but they'll go through all the cost narratives and make any adjustments in which they disagree on how the actual cost elements were built up. So at that point, once that's done, the probable cost will say just sits until the technical team goes through the whole tech approach and then they read the whole basis of estimate and they will go by BOE and write a memo to the cost chair. Because now keep in mind, BOE doesn't actually have prices in it, right? It has numbers, but it's prices or cost. And they'll write a memo and say, BOE, 1.4.5, we don't believe that they can do the job for what they said. You need to raise this, by 3 heads, or the material price that they had is unachievable. Research what it should be and up it. If we're talking about hardware, so they will give a memo to the cost team by BOE on whether or not they're good with it or they're not good with it and they want to have an adjustment. So I kind of actually want to make it sound like this. A question that I get a lot is, are those teams siloed? Kind of. It's not that they can't talk to each other, but the cost team has to be careful what they share because the tech team can't see prices and cost. So, I mean, they can have a conversation about the memo, and they typically do, right? They'll say, they'll pull up the BOE, and the cost team is going to say, okay, you showed me what you don't like here. Like, just like walk me through it, right? I want to make sure I understand. And then they'll go and make the adjustment. I'll say relatively independent from the actual technical evaluators. You have layers of folks that oversee the whole thing, so it's not that siloed. But you typically have a small group and a small group, and they're supposed to be relatively independent. Jenny, I guess to kind of wrap it up, then that cost analyst team goes through and makes adjustment where applicable in that what they've now owned as their probable cost by BOE, which can be pretty complicated, right? Because some BOE probably affects, multiple tabs, all the out years. Then, of course, if they changed indirects and escalations, if you change something, you have to make sure that that all kind of trickles down. But that's what they do. They go through that probable cost that they now own, and they make adjustment one by one going down that memo. And then when they're done, that's your probable cost. The question I get asked all the time is, well, the probable cost compared to the bid value, how far off do we need to be? Totally depends. I'm happy to, advise clients, solicitation by solicitation. We need to be within 5% or, 15% or whatever makes sense for that acquisition. But it really depends. I mean, obviously you want as little adjustments as possible. What goes to the source selection authority at the end of the day? And this is kind of important to know, the probable cost number that is come up with, that is the number in which is written in the source selection decision document and what the trade is actually made against, not your bid value. So, for example, if you bid 100 million and your probable cost is 110 million, the source selection authority is making a decision as if your bid is 110 million. If someone else bid 105 million and their probable cost had no adjustments, technically you're $5 million more expensive than they were, even though their bid is actually more than yours. So that's super important. That's why probable costs and having a clean BOE and a clean cost volume is so important. I almost don't want to get too caught up in the deltas. If they think you're too high, that's where reasonableness comes in. If they think you're too low, that's realism. By the way, that's actually a bigger problem in industry. Kind of the bid to win kind of attitude. We'll figure it out in execution. The government's getting smart about that, right? So they're really focused on realism, which is, simple terms, right? If you get 10 deck quotes to put a deck on your house and they're, all $15,000, give or take a 5% delta, and then someone comes in and says they can do it for $6,000, immediately that just doesn't seem realistic, right? So hopefully that kind of drives home a little bit what probable cost is, and quite frankly why it matters so much. Now, on the flip side, I just have to say this because hopefully most of the audience knows that what you bid, though, is actually what they award you at. So it's kind of funny, right? It's like the probable cost is how the decision is made. But in my scenario, let's just say it went to 110, but you were selected. They wouldn't award you to 110, they'd award you to 100.
And is that something you have found people sort of overlook when putting that proposal together?
I think the short answer is yes. I would say industry is well aware that they're going to be awarded at what they bid. I'd kind of be interested to know if the audience knew that that's how the decision document, if they're a student, they attend debriefings. Hopefully that's not new news to them, but hopefully, some will say, newer acquisition professionals that maybe haven't gone through a major source selection and actually are on the government side. It's not something that, I guess if you haven't done it, it's maybe not counterintuitive, I guess would it's kind of weird to say you're going to assess the value in which the probable cost was not what they actually bid. If you haven't lived it, if you've lived it, it's probably second nature to you. But I'm not sure the average Joe, so to speak, knows that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's helpful to hear. And then moving on to one of my last questions for you today about AI. AI-based evaluation tools you've mentioned are starting to be used for early round BOE reviews. How do you see this shifting proposal strategies, and what keywords or structured elements would help ensure that proposals don't get flagged or potentially misread by these AI evaluation tools?
This is an excellent question, and I get this a lot. So when I was overseeing the IC Acquisition Center for Excellence, and this was years ago, we were actually already looking into this. So the short answer is it's coming. The way that it's going to roll out is the first thing that they're going to look at is compliance. So that's relatively. I'm not an AI guy, right? So I'll probably have a bunch of AI people yelling at me, but it's a little easier to load up Section L, which are the instructions. Those can be loaded into a tool and say the first thing I want you to do is, to kind of keep it with BOE, is this BOE compliant, right? Which by the way is kind of a pain, right? And that can take a long time for a team just to go through and say, okay, they used our templates, they addressed everything that they were supposed to address. There's no, obvious, boxes that weren't, like they forgot to check the methodology or whatever, right? That it's clean. So that's going to be step one. The first step is really just compliance. Then the step after that, it's kind of funny. The analogy that someone had, because I was arguing the other side of this 5 years ago, is if you type in a math number that you wouldn't do in your head into a calculator, do you do it by paper, or do you trust what the calculator said? And that's what someone said to me, and I said, well, yeah. I mean, if I punch in something into a calculator, I mean, obviously I trust it. And they said that's just because it's been around so long and it's been operated so many times that you now have confidence in it. So that is where our evaluation is going. So that's a long-winded way of saying that it's going to be baby steps. They're going to start with compliance. There's going to be iterations, lots of hands-on human involvement still, right? But eventually that compliance is going to say, it does a pretty good job. And the reason why I say this is BOEs are a lot of times templated, but the other sections are, did you, exceed Times New Roman and 8-point font in your graphic? Having AI go through and do that is really kind of awesome if you've ever been an evaluator. What I believe AI is going to do is it's going to review all that stuff and it's going to spit out a compliance report for you based on your solicitation requirements. My opinion is it will be highly scrutinized as it goes along, but I think it's going to get pretty good at that, right? And then I think that the government, right? I mean, trying to gain efficiencies, they're eventually going to say it does a pretty good job at this, right? Like I'm not sure that we need to spend too much time dedicating resource to this. It does a pretty good job. I believe the next step is, can you put together what they call a consensus evaluation report? So that's the first document that an evaluation team puts together. And that's true whether it's security or past performance or technical or management or whatever eval team we're talking about. That first step is a consensus evaluation report. So if AI can generate, I'll say, that draft consensus evaluation report, especially if it can put into the paragraphs, the reference, the kind of the what, why impact of each strengths and weaknesses, and then instead of having to go in and type all that, a team can go in a conference room. I've done this many a time, right? They pull it up, they go through each one. They certainly should still read everything and add or subtract anything that was missed or they agree with. But I don't think we're that far away from AI being able to do a consensus evaluation report really for all the volumes. And then, one could argue, which I have a little bit admittedly have a hard time seeing, can you then compare agreed upon CERs based on the objectives that are loaded on which strengths are more important to the customer and actually writing decision documents? That I struggle with a little bit. Again, Jenny, asked me in 5 years, they're probably going to be doing, and you're going to say,
Yeah.
AI is going to do compliance. I very much think that's going to happen. I also think it's going to help generate that initial evaluation report that then the evaluation team should highly scrutinize. But just the amount of time it saves. I mean, if it's 80% accurate, that's huge for an evaluation team. So I think just getting to that point would be awesome for the government and industry, right? Because then they're turning stuff quicker, and you're not having all your key personnel sitting on the bench, hoping you win kind of thing. That's very expensive. And so hopefully that addressed a little bit. And of course, the probable cost, right? If you can have AI go through the instructions of a cost spreadsheet, then could that the ownership of that probable cost, can that cost analyst accept that quicker? In my mind, you can have AI take those instructions, right, and make sure that there's no formula breaks. And you even could load in the approved indirect rates and that kinds of stuff, and it could just make the adjustments for you. I mean, that to me is kind of the level of consensus evaluation report, like the initial, kind of the initial probable cost development. um Outside of that, doing the actual tech, looking at BOEs and then doing the manual adjustments, I don't know. I'm not an AI guy. Maybe it'll get there. Maybe it'll get there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so interesting how it's already started to exceed our expectations, like you
That's
said,
very
from
true.
5 years ago. So who
Yeah.
knows? But I think there is a lot of merit as well to saying that some parts still do need a human eye and a human brain, and they
Mhm.
can't be just plugged and placed, and it shouldn't be, because it's still prone to errors and it's not perfect, and it's just based on what knowledge and, context it's given prior. So if it hasn't had an experience with some subject or proposal before, it can be incorrect. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over time. And I think it's really interesting as well for our audience to understand from the other side perspective how AI will be useful and will be a part of this future shift
Oh
in,
yeah,
in
the
reading these.
agencies are already looking at it. I mean,
Yeah,
just like
totally.
industry is, right? I mean, industry's looking at proposal content management systems and being able to do it on the back end, right? Can they load RFPs and help it, put together kind of an initial proposal, right? That then they can have their team, instead of starting at zero, right? They can start at 60, 70%. I mean, can you imagine like starting the whole method at red team, and it's kind of solutioned, and it's gone through the pink team and all that stuff. It's like, and you're starting at red. I mean, that would be a huge BNP savings, right? So I'm not sure that's necessarily perfected yet either, but I suspect that's coming as well.
And then moving on to my last question for
Mhm.
you, a little something about yourself. What does keep you curious in your work after years of working in this industry?
It's interesting what I really enjoy doing. And I'm sure when my teenagers watch this video, right, they're going to say, no, it's because you're super competitive and you want to win. True statement.
It
True statement. So
can be
what
both.
I
It can
would
be
say,
both.
what keeps me curious though is architecting solutions. I find that so rewarding. Admittedly, most of my focus is DoD and IC, and the stuff they do is super awesome. And thank you to everyone out there that's doing that. Their mission's so great that it keeps me up at night in a good way to continue to try to figure out how to solve their problem, and now to help them out. I mean, I was a former govy for a long time, right? And I kind of still have that passion. So outside of the competitive nature of it, which clearly I named my company Red Ocean, so I love a competitive nature. If you guys Google what Red Ocean means, so I love competition, but I think most importantly, I really like to solution and solve problems. Our hard problems. That's facing our nation.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for sharing all of your insights today. I know our audience will be able to take away so much from this. So thanks
Good.
again, David, for being here.
Absolutely, Jenny. It was my pleasure.